My dear friends, let us ponder for a moment the curious nature of belief. Not belief in the grand cosmic sense, though that certainly has its place, but belief of a more immediate, personal nature. The belief others have in us, and perhaps more importantly, the belief we have in ourselves. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you knew, every fiber of your being, that you were right, that you had something important to say or do, and yet no one seemed to listen, no one seemed to believe? It's a peculiar kind of aloneness, isn't it? To stand firm in your conviction while the world around you shrugs its shoulders or shakes its head in doubt. In such moments, it's easy to falter, to question yourself, to wonder if perhaps you've been mistaken all along. After all, if no one else can see what you see, if no one else believes what you believe, might it not be possible that you're the one who's wrong? But I put it to you that this moment of doubt, this crossroads of belief and disbelief, is precisely where the most important battles are fought and won. It is here, in the face of skepticism, indifference, or outright opposition, that we have the opportunity to demonstrate the strength of our convictions and the power of perseverance. You see, belief, true deep-seated belief, is not a static thing. It's not a destination we arrive at once and for all. Rather, it's a journey, a process of constant affirmation and reaffirmation. And sometimes, the person we most need to convince is not others, but ourselves. Think for a moment about a child learning to walk. Those first tentative steps are often met with disbelief, even from the child herself. She wobbles, she falls, she may even cry in frustration, but something within her, some innate knowledge of her own potential, urges her to try again and again and again. The adults around her may offer encouragement, may hold out their arms in invitation, but ultimately it is the child's own persistent belief in her ability to walk that propels her forward. And lo and behold, one day she is running, skipping, dancing, all because she kept going, kept believing, even when her own body seemed to doubt her. This, my friends, is the power of perseverance in the face of disbelief. It's a power we all possess, though we often forget it in the face of adversity or doubt. But let's delve deeper into this idea. Why is it that we so often falter when faced with disbelief from others? Why does external validation, or the lack thereof, hold such sway over our own convictions? I believe it stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of belief itself. You see, we often think of belief as something that requires consensus, as if truth were a democracy where the majority opinion wins. But history tells us a different story, doesn't it? Think of all the great innovators, the revolutionaries, the visionaries who changed the world. Were they not, at some point, voices crying out in the wilderness? Were they not, for a time, disbelieved, dismissed, even ridiculed? Consider the story of a young woman I once knew. She had a vision for a new way of teaching children, a method that flew in the face of conventional wisdom. When she first presented her ideas, she was met with skepticism from her colleagues, resistance from school administrators, even concern from parents. For a time, she doubted herself. The weight of disbelief from others threatened to crush her conviction. But something within her, some deep-seated knowledge of the rightness of her approach, urged her to keep going. And so she did. Day after day, she refined her methods, she gathered data, documented results, honed her arguments, she spoke to anyone who would listen, and even to those who wouldn't. She kept going, fueled by her belief in the potential of her ideas to make a real difference in children's lives. It took years, but slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. A few teachers started to take notice of her results. A handful of parents saw remarkable changes in their children. And then, like a dam finally giving way to the pressure of the water behind it, belief began. Today, her teaching method is widely recognized and implemented in schools across the country. But here's the crucial point. The method didn't suddenly become effective when others began to believe in it. It was effective all along. What changed was not the truth of her ideas, but others' perception of that truth. The story illustrates a vital principle. The truth of your convictions does not depend on others' belief in them. Your job is not to convince the world, but to remain true to what you know is right, to keep going in the face of disbelief, trusting that eventually the truth will make itself known. But I can almost hear some of you thinking, that's all well and good, but how do we do this? How do we keep going when it seems the whole world is against us? It's a fair question, and one that deserves careful consideration. The first step, I believe, is to cultivate a deep, unshakable belief in yourself and your ideas. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or closed-minded. Rather, it means developing a quiet confidence, a certainty that comes not from ego, but from careful thought, thorough examination, and genuine conviction. Think of it this way. If you were standing on solid ground, would you doubt its ability to support you simply because someone else said it might give way? Of course not. You would trust the evidence of your own experience, your own senses. In the same way, when you've done the work of examining your ideas, when you've tested them and found them true, you must learn to trust your own judgment even when others doubt. But belief alone is not enough. To keep going in the face of disbelief, we must also cultivate resilience. We must develop the ability to weather criticism, to bounce back from setbacks, to persist in the face of opposition. This resilience comes, in part, from understanding that disbelief from others is not a reflection on you or the validity of your ideas. More often than not, it's a reflection of their own limitations, their own fears, their own resistance to change. I'm reminded of another story, this one about a young scientist who proposed a radical new theory in his field. His ideas were met with ridicule from his peers, dismissal from his superiors. For years, he struggled to get funding for his research, to find platforms to share his work. But instead of becoming bitter or giving up, he chose to see each rejection, each dismissal as a challenge to refine his ideas, to gather more evidence, to articulate his theory more clearly. He understood that the disbelief of others did not negate the truth of his work. It simply meant he had more work to do in bringing that truth to light. And here's the remarkable thing. Over time, this very opposition, this disbelief that could have discouraged him, instead became the whetstone upon which he sharpened his ideas. The criticism forced him to examine his theory from every angle, to address every possible objection, to build an absolutely ironclad case for his views. When his theory was finally accepted years later, it was not just accepted but hailed as a breakthrough, precisely because it had been so thoroughly vetted, so rigorously defended against years of skepticism. This scientist's story teaches us another crucial lesson about keeping going in the face of disbelief. The opposition you face can actually strengthen your ideas, if you let it. Each objection is an opportunity to refine your thinking, each criticism a chance to bolster your argument. But perhaps the most important thing to remember when facing disbelief is this. Belief often follows action, not the other way around. We tend to think that we must first believe in order to act, but in reality, it's often through our actions that belief, both our own and others, is born and strengthened. How do you come to believe that you can do something you've never done before? You try it, you take that first uncertain step, and then another, and another. It's through the doing that belief grows. The same principle applies when we're trying to bring others to believe in our ideas. We can talk until we're blue in the face, but often it's only when people see us putting our ideas into action, see the results of our work, that belief begins to take. I once knew a man who had a vision for transforming a neglected neighborhood in his city. He spoke to community leaders, to city officials, to anyone who would listen about his plans for urban renewal. But for years, his words fell on deaf ears. The prevailing belief was that the neighborhood was beyond saving, that any effort to improve it would be futile. But this man refused to be discouraged. Instead of continuing to argue his case, he decided to show rather than tell. He began small, organizing community cleanup days, planting flowers in abandoned lots, repainting. At first, few people joined him, But he kept going day after day, week after week. Slowly, others began to take notice. A few neighbors joined his efforts. Then a few more. Local businesses started to contribute resources. As the neighborhood began to visibly improve, belief began to grow. People who had lived there for years started to see their community in a new light. City officials who had dismissed his plans now came to him for advice. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took years of persistent effort. But through his actions, through his refusal to give up in the face of disbelief, this man not only realized his vision, but inspired an entire community to believe in the possibility. Because like the essence, contagious, but it's often caught through action rather than argument. When we keep going, when we continue to act on our convictions despite disbelief from others, we create a powerful testimony that speaks louder than words ever could. Keeping going in the face of disbelief is not easy. It requires a kind of courage that goes beyond the momentary bravery of facing a single challenge. It demands a sustained day in, day out commitment to our convictions, a willingness to face doubt and dismissal with steadfast determination. So how do we cultivate this kind of courage? How do we find the strength to keep going when it seems like no one believes in us or our ideas? The cultivation of courage in the face of disbelief begins, I believe, with a clear understanding of our own motivations. Why do we believe what we believe? Why are we so committed to this idea, this cause, this course of action? When we can answer these questions with clarity and conviction, we create a wellspring of strength to draw upon in moments of doubt. Think of it as creating an internal compass, a true north that guides us even when the path ahead seems unclear or when others are pointing us in different directions. This compass is not set by the opinions of others or the prevailing winds of popular belief, but by our own careful consideration, our own deep-seated convictions. I'm reminded of a story I once heard about a young activist who was fighting against a powerful corporation that was polluting her community's water supply. For years, she faced not just disbelief but active opposition. Local officials, swayed by the corporation's influence, dismissed her concerns. Many in the community, dependent on the jobs the corporation provided, were reluctant to support her cause. There were times when the weight of disbelief threatened to crush her spirit. In those moments, she would return to the reason she began this fight in the first place: the health and well-being of her community, especially the children who were suffering from the effects of the pollution. This clarity of purpose, this unwavering commitment to what she knew was right, gave her the strength to keep going, even when it seemed like no one believed her. And here's the remarkable thing. Like her persistence, her refusal to be silenced eventually began to change minds. First a few, then more and more people in the community began to listen, to look at the evidence she had gathered. It took years, but eventually, her solitary voice grew into a chorus that could no longer be ignored. This young woman's story illustrates another crucial aspect of keeping going in the face of disbelief: the importance of focusing on the truth of your message rather than on the act of convincing others. You see, when we become too fixated on making others believe us, we risk losing sight of the very thing that makes our message powerful. It's truth. Truth has a power all its own. It doesn't require belief to be true. Your job is not to force others to believe, but to continue speaking and acting in alignment with the truth as you understand it. In time, the truth will make itself known. This shift in focus, from convincing others to simply living your truth, can be incredibly liberating. It frees you from the exhausting work of trying to control others' perceptions and allows you to direct your energy towards what truly matters. But let's address another challenge that often arises when we're faced with persistent disbelief: the temptation to doubt ourselves. It's natural, when faced with skepticism or opposition from others, to begin to question our own convictions. Maybe they're right. We might think, maybe I am mistaken. This self-doubt can be paralyzing if we let it take hold. But here's the thing. Doubt in and of itself is not the enemy. In fact, a certain amount of self-questioning can be healthy. It keeps us honest, prevents us from becoming rigid or dogmatic in our thinking. The key is to make doubt work for you rather than against you. When doubts arise, don't try to suppress them. Instead, use them as an opportunity to re-examine your ideas, to shore up any weak points in your reasoning, to gather more evidence if needed. I once knew a writer who spent years working on a novel that challenged some deeply held societal beliefs. Time and again, publishers rejected her work, telling her that her ideas were too controversial, that readers wouldn't accept them. With each rejection, a seed of doubt was planted. But instead of allowing these doubts to defeat her, she used them as fuel for her work. Each time she felt uncertain, she would return to her research, deepening her understanding, refining her arguments. She sought out conversations with people who disagreed with her, not to argue, but to truly understand their perspective and address their concerns in her work. The result? When her novel was finally published, it was not just accepted, but celebrated for its nuanced treatment of complex issues. The very doubts that could have derailed her instead became the means by which her work was strengthened. This writer's experience teaches us an important lesson. Our doubts, when approached with curiosity and openness rather than fear, can actually deepen our conviction and strengthen our message. Now, let's consider another vital aspect of keeping going in the face of disbelief: the power of community. While the journey of believing in yourself and your ideas can often feel solitary, the truth is we are not meant to walk this. Finding even one other person who believes in you and your vision can make an enormous difference. This person doesn't have to fully understand or even agree with everything you're saying or doing. They simply need to believe in you, in your integrity, in your potential to make a difference. Think of this person or people as your belief battery. When your own belief is running low, when the weight of others' disbelief is threatening to overwhelm you, you can draw strength and renewal from their faith in you. I'm reminded of the story of two brothers who had an idea for a flying machine at a time when most people believed human flight was impossible. They faced ridicule, skepticism, even hostility from many quarters, but they had each other. When one brother's belief faltered, the other's conviction would hold steady, providing the support needed to keep going. Their mutual belief, their unwavering support for each other, created a reservoir of strength that sustained them through years of failed attempts, setbacks, and widespread disbelief. And in the end, their persistence paid off. They didn't just prove human flight was possible. They revolutionized the world. The story illustrates a profound truth. When shared, grows stronger. When we find others who believe in us and our ideas, our own belief is reinforced, our resolve strengthened. We are reminded that we're not crazy for believing, that our vision has merit, that our efforts have value. But what if you can't find anyone who believes in you or your ideas? What if you truly are a voice crying out alone in the wilderness? First, let me assure you that this situation, while challenging, is not as uncommon as you might think. Many great ideas, many world-changing movements began with a single person believing what no one else could yet see. In such situations, your task is twofold. First, you must become your own most steadfast believer. This doesn't mean ignoring valid criticism or refusing to consider other perspectives. Rather, it means cultivating a deep, unshakable faith in the truth of your vision and the rightness of your path. Secondly, you must work to create a community of belief around you. This doesn't happen overnight. It begins with sharing your vision with others, not with the desperate energy of someone seeking validation, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they have something valuable to offer. You might begin by finding people who, while they may not fully believe in your specific idea, believe in the values that underpin it. Or people who, while skeptical of your conclusions, respect your process, your integrity, your commitment to truth. From these small seeds of shared values or mutual respect, belief can grow. As you continue to act on your convictions, as you demonstrate the validity of your ideas through persistent action, you create opportunities for others to see what you see, to believe what you believe. Remember, every movement, every revolution, Every paradigm shift in human history began with a single person who dared to believe something different, who had the courage to keep going even when no one else believed. But let's talk about another crucial aspect of keeping going in the face of disbelief: the importance of taking care of yourself. The journey of persistent belief in the face of skepticism or opposition can be exhausting, both emotionally and physically. If we're not careful, we can burn ourselves out, depleting the very energy we need to keep going. The self-care isn't selfish, it's strategic. Think of yourself as the primary instrument through which your vision will be realized. Just as a musician must keep their instrument and tune in good repair, you must tend to your own well-being if you hope to effectively bring your ideas to the world. This might mean setting boundaries to protect your time and energy. It might mean developing practices that renew and refresh you, perhaps meditation or time in nature, or engaging in creative pursuits unrelated to your main work. Generally means paying attention to the basics, getting enough sleep, eating well, moving your body. I once knew an educator who was working tirelessly to implement a new teaching methodology in her school district. She faced significant resistance from administrators and fellow teachers who were comfortable with the status quo. For months, she worked around the clock, trying to prove the value. But as time wore on, she found herself becoming irritable, less effective in her arguments, more easily discouraged by setbacks. It was only when a mentor pointed out that she was neglecting her own well-being that she realized she was undermining her own efforts by not taking care of herself. She began to set stricter work hours for herself, to take regular breaks, to engage in activities that brought her joy outside of her work. To her surprise, the self-care didn't slow her progress, it accelerated it. She found she had more energy, more clarity of thought, more resilience in the face of continued. This educator's experience reminds us of an important truth. Keeping going isn't just about pushing harder. It's about pacing yourself, about sustaining your energy and your belief over the long haul. Now let's address another challenge that often arises when we're faced with persistent disbelief: the temptation to compromise our vision in an attempt to gain acceptance or belief from others. It's a seductive idea. If we just water down our message a little, if we make it less challenging or more palatable to the mainstream, maybe then people will believe us. But here's the thirdly value in considering how to communicate your ideas effectively. Compromising the essence of your vision in an attempt to win believers often backfires. Not only does it dilute the power of your message, but it can also undermine your own belief and passion for your work. I'm reminded of a social entrepreneur I once met who had a bold vision for addressing homelessness in his city. His approach was radical, challenging many commonly held beliefs about the nature of homelessness and the most effective ways to address it. Initially, he faced significant skepticism and resistance from city officials and established charities working in this space. Discouraged by the lack of support, he considered modifying his approach to align more closely with existing methods, thinking this might help him gain acceptance and funding. But as he explored this compromise, he realized that doing so would undermine the very innovations that made his approach potentially transformative. Instead of compromising his vision, he decided to double down on it. He refined his arguments, gathered more data to support his ideas, and most importantly, he began implementing his approach on a small scale, using his own resources and a handful of committed volunteers. The results spoke for themselves. While it took time, his unconventional methods began to show remarkable success rates. Gradually, those who had been skeptical began to take notice. What had once seemed radical now began to look innovative and necessary. This entrepreneur story illustrates a crucial point. Sometimes, the very thing that makes others skeptical of your ideas, their novelty, their challenge to the status quo, is precisely what makes them valuable and important. Compromising that uniqueness in an attempt to gain acceptance can rob your vision of its power to truly make a difference. So how do we stay true to our vision while still finding ways to help others understand and believe in it? The key, I believe, lies in focusing on effective communication rather than compromise. This means really listening to the concerns and objections of others, not to change your ideas, but to understand how to better explain them. It means finding common ground, areas where your vision aligns with values or goals that others already hold, and using these as bridges to help others understand your broader message. It means being patient, recognizing that big ideas often take time to be understood and accepted. Most importantly, it means showing rather than just telling. Remember, belief often follows action. When you consistently act in alignment with your vision, when you create tangible results even on a small scale, you provide evidence that can begin to shift others' perceptions. As we near the end of our time together, I want to address one final, crucial point about keeping going when others don't believe. The importance of celebrating your progress, no matter how small it might seem, when we're focused on a big vision, especially one that others don't yet believe in. It's easy to become discouraged by how far we still have to go. We can lose sight of how far we've already come. But acknowledging and celebrating your progress, even when it feels insignificant in the grand scheme of things, is vital to maintaining your motivation and belief over the long haul. Every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory. Every person who moves from active disbelief to curiosity about your ideas, every small implementation of your vision, every bit of progress in refining and articulating your message, these are all wins worth celebrating. I once knew an environmental activist who spent years trying to convince her community to adopt more sustainable practices. For a long time, it seemed like no one was listening. But instead of becoming discouraged, she chose to celebrate every tiny victory. The first time a neighbor asked her advice about composting. The day the local school agreed to start a small recycling program. The community meeting where, for the first time, someone other than her brought up the issue of sustainability. These celebrations, small as they might have seemed to an outsider, fueled her persistence. They reminded her that change was happening, even if it was slower than she might have wished. They helped her to keep going, to keep believing, even when the larger goals still seemed far away. And here's the beautiful thing. Over time, these small victories began to accumulate. The ripples of change grew wider. What had started as one woman's seemingly quixotic mission gradually grew into a community-wide movement towards sustainability. This activist story reminds us of an important truth. Big changes often start small. By celebrating these small beginnings, we nurture our own belief and create the energy needed to keep going. But let's delve deeper into this idea of celebration. It's not just about patting yourself on the back or throwing a party. Those things can certainly have their place. It's about cultivating a mindset of appreciation and recognition for the journey itself, not just the destination. When we only focus on the end goal, on the moment when everyone finally believes and our vision is fully realized, we set ourselves up for frustration and burnout. The path of bringing a new idea into the world is rarely straight or smooth. It's filled with setbacks, unexpected turns, moments of doubt and difficulty. By learning to celebrate the small victories along the way, we train ourselves to find joy and satisfaction in the process itself. We become more resilient, better able to weather the inevitable storms of disbelief and opposition. We cultivate a kind of patience that isn't passive waiting, but active engagement with each step of the journey. Think about a child learning to walk. We don't wait until they can run a marathon to celebrate their progress. We cheer for their first wobbly step, their first time standing up without support, each small increase in balance and coordination. And it's this celebration, this positive reinforcement that encourages them to keep trying, to keep. In the same way, when you're working to bring a new idea into the world, you need to become your own cheerleader. You need to learn to recognize and celebrate each small step forward, each tiny victory. This might mean keeping a journal where you record your progress, no matter how incremental it might seem. It might mean sharing your small wins with your support network, the people who believe in you and your vision. It might mean creating rituals or rewards for yourself to mark milestones along the way. Whatever form it takes, this practice of celebration serves multiple purposes. It boosts your morale, helping you to persist in the face of disbelief. It provides evidence of your progress, which can be powerful ammunition against your own doubts and the skepticism of others. And perhaps most importantly, it helps you to enjoy the journey itself, to find fulfillment, not just in the achievement of your ultimate goal, but in the day-to-day work of bringing your vision to life. As we draw to a close, I want to leave you with one final thought. Keeping going when others don't believe in you or your ideas is not just an act of personal determination. It's an act of service to the world. See, every great idea, every important truth, every significant advance in human knowledge or understanding started as a belief held by a minority, often a minority of one. If the people who held these beliefs had given up in the face of disbelief, if they had allowed the skepticism of others to silence them, our world would be immeasurably poorer. When you persist in your belief, when you keep going despite the disbelief of others, you're not just serving your own vision, you're serving the potential for that vision to change the world. You're holding space for a new possibility, a new way of thinking or being or doing. That might just be exactly what the world needs. So I urge you, whatever your vision, whatever truth you're striving to bring into the world, keep going, keep believing, keep taking those steps forward, even when it seems no one else believes. For in your persistence, in your unwavering commitment to your truth, lies the power to change.